Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into an idea that pretty much goes against everything modern life screams at us. The idea that when it comes to choice, more isn't always better. In fact, as we're gonna see, sometimes it's a whole lot worse.
So let's just jump right in with the big question. We're all taught to believe that having an endless buffet of options is the ultimate goal, right? But is it, really? Does having 250 kinds of mustard at the grocery store actually make us any happier? You know, what's so fascinating is that this is not a new idea. Not at all. We're talking over 2,000 years ago, the Roman playwright Terence was already warning us about the dangers of having too much. It seems like we've been wrestling with this concept of too much of a good thing for a very, very long time.
All right, so to really get to the bottom of this whole paradox, here's the plan. We're going to start with why we believe in this myth of more choice. Then we'll look at a couple of classic experiments, one with jam, another with essays. After that, we'll unpack the psychology behind what's actually happening in our brains. And finally, we'll see how we can use all this in our own lives.
So let's kick things off with a belief that's so common today. In our society, it's almost like an article of faith that our desire for choice is just infinite. And you see it everywhere, don't you? Entire aisles dedicated to just one thing, like potato chips, or scrolling endlessly through streaming services trying to find something to watch. The message we get is crystal clear. More options equals more control, and that should lead to more happiness. But as we're about to find out, the research tells a totally different story, one that really puts a huge crack in that foundation.
Okay, let's get to our first big piece of evidence. It's this brilliant little experiment done by Sheena, Iyengar, and Lepper. It's so simple, so elegant, and honestly, the results are absolutely mind-blowing.
So here's how they did it. Researchers went to this upscale grocery store, the kind that's famous for having a massive selection. They set up a tasting booth with some high-quality exotic jams. Now, on one day, they put out this huge, dazzling display of 24 different flavors. And on another day, they offered a much smaller, more curated selection of just 6.
Now at first, things went exactly how you'd think they would. The bigger display with 24 jams was like a magnet for shoppers. It was way more eye-catching. So, sure enough, more people stopped to check it out, about 60% of passersby, compared to 40% for the smaller one. So far, it's looking good for the more is better team.
But this is where the story takes a massive turn. When the researchers looked at who actually bought the jam, whoa, the results were just stunning. Out of all the people who stopped at that small 6-jar display, an incredible 30% went on to buy one, and the big, impressive display with 24 jams, a tiny 3%. That initial attraction completely failed to turn into a sale.
Just let that sink in for a second. Shoppers who had fewer options were literally 10 times more likely to actually buy some jam. This shows the whole paradox perfectly. The very thing that drew people in, that huge variety, was the exact thing that paralyzed them and kept them from making a decision at all.
Okay, so you might be thinking, was that just some weird thing about jam? Well, to find out, the researchers took this whole concept out of the grocery store and into the classroom to see if the same principle would apply to a completely different kind of choice. The setup was this. Students in a social psychology class at Stanford were offered a chance to write an essay for extra credit. Simple enough. One group of students was given a nice, concise list of 6 potential topics. And the other group? They were handed a much, much longer list of 30 different topics to choose from. And guess what? The results were a perfect echo of the jam study. When you look at who actually did the assignment, the students with fewer choices were way more likely to turn one in. 74% versus only 60%. But here's the really wild part. It wasn't just about participation. The essays written by the students who chose from the shorter list were actually graded as being significantly better. So not only did more choice lead to less action, it also led to lower quality work.
Okay, so we've seen this effect in a grocery store and in a classroom. The massive question is, why? What is going on inside our heads when we're faced with just too many options?
Well, psychologists have a name for it: choice overload. You can think of it like a cognitive short circuit. Our brains are trying to make the best possible decision, but they just get completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information they have to process. This is what leads to that feeling of paralysis, that stress, and ironically, even less happiness with whatever we end up choosing.
A third study, this time with gourmet chocolates, really gets to the heart of this paradox. When people had to choose from 30 chocolates instead of just 6, they actually said they enjoyed the process of choosing more. It felt good to have all those options. But
And this is the key, they also found it way more difficult and frustrating. And in the end, they were less satisfied with the chocolate they finally picked. That initial fun of having lots of choices came at a really steep price.
So what's really happening here? Well, when you have 30 options, the pressure is on you to find the single perfect one. That feeling of responsibility is way higher, and so is the potential for regret. It's called regret aversion. You're much more likely to start wondering, what if one of the other 29 was actually better? With only 6 options, it's just a lot easier to feel confident that you made a pretty good choice.
So how does all this translate from these studies into the real world? Because this isn't just some academic curiosity, right? It has huge implications for how businesses operate and for our own day-to-day happiness.
I mean, some of the biggest companies in the world have learned this lesson the hard way. Take Procter & Gamble. They famously cut their line of Head & Shoulders shampoo from 26 different versions down to just 15. And what happened? Sales went up by 10%. By making it easier for customers to choose, they actually sold more product.
And this all comes back to that feeling we all know so well, and it's captured perfectly in this Calvin and Hobbes quote. That feeling of standing in the peanut butter aisle, just completely overwhelmed by chunky, extra chunky, organic, low sodium. It's hilarious because it's so painfully true.
So, that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We live in a world that is constantly screaming at us that more is better. But the evidence clearly shows that satisfaction, motivation, and even better performance can come from embracing limitations. So the real question for you is, in your own life, where can you find freedom not in having more choices, but in having fewer, better ones?